Hello there and welcome. In the previous episode, we created the main menu of the game and we also created an in-game menu. So now we have an option to start a new game, we have an option to quit the game, and we also created a few sub-menus that are still empty. Now that we have all of these menus, we can start working on saving and loading the game. Now, saving the game is not something too complicated code-wise. It is something that takes some time to do because there is a lot of things involved. We need to create the menus, we need to create different methods, and of course when we finally get to saving the data, we need to gather all of this data inside our game, and it depends on the game. If you have a lot of things going on, then you need to spend more time to save all of these things, and if you only have a high score and a player health, then it will take you just a few minutes to create your saving system. In our case, we don't have a lot of things to save, but we still need to create our saving system, and when we add more things into the game, we're going to add them into the saving of the game. So in order to understand what we're trying to do, I created this graph over here, and this simply demonstrates the different ways we can save inside Unity. So for example, we have this player stats class. We have a player's health, a player's stamina, and a player hydration. Of course, it can also contain a player position, the inventory content, and any other thing that you want to save. So we have three different ways to save in Unity. We have the PlayerPref, we have saving into a binary file, and we have saving into a JSON file. Now, we're going to start talking about the PlayerPref. The PlayerPref is the simplest way. It's just saying I want to save a float named player health, and it has a value of 100, or it has a value of 80. And then you say I want to get this player's health float, and it will give you the value. So it's very simple, it's very straightforward. But we usually use this PlayerPref for simple things. For example, our settings menu, right? We want to save the volume, we want to save the resolution, we want to save all of these things. So usually we use the PlayerPref for that. We are not going to use PlayerPref to save the entire data of the game because that's not the way it's done. Of course, if you have a very small game, as I told you before, with a high score and a player and he needs to pick up some candies, something very simple and small, you can definitely use PlayerPref to save all of your data because you're going to have maybe just 5 or 10 different things you need to save, so you can use PlayerPref. But when you have hundreds or even thousands of different variables of data that you want to save, PlayerPref is not going to do it. So we are still going to use PlayerPref inside our project, and we're going to use it for the settings menu. So you're going to learn how to use it if you never learned, and of course we also need to save our settings, and that's what we're going to start with. After we are done with that, we're going to actually save the content of the game. So for this, we have both of these ways, and both of these ways save into a file. So that's very useful because, for example, you want to save your game into a file and then you want to back up this file, because if you saved something into the PlayerPref and then you deleted the game and you installed the game back again, all of this data will be gone because PlayerPref basically saves the data into your game, into the installment of your game. But both of these methods save it into a file, so we can always go to the folder, find the file, and simply copy it and store it somewhere. Now, the difference between these two methods is that with the binary file, we're simply saving our entire data in a byte array, and you don't need to understand it completely, but it simply serializes all of your information into bytecode, into machine code, and it saves it into a file. So if you open the file, you will basically just see gibberish, and there will be nothing you can actually do with this information without the game. So the only way to use this file is by loading it inside the game. The second way is to save it into a JSON file. So you can simply go open your file in some kind of text editor and you can actually see all of this data. Now, both of these methods have disadvantages, right? The JSON one has a disadvantage because if you save all of this information in a plain human language, then anyone can go open the file, change the data, and then load the game, and he will have different data, right? He can say that he has $1 million or he has more XP than he actually has. So he can actually modify the file. And it's definitely something we don't want to allow to happen. Now, there is a fix to this. With the binary, we actually have a more serious problem. And the problem is that if this file is going to get corrupted, there is no way to save all of this information and it's basically gone. I don't know about you, but I had a lot of games through my life that the save file was just corrupted and I lost all the progress and there was nothing I could do. And the reason for that is that when we're using this binary formatter to serialize our information into bytecode, then it takes all of the different classes and it stores them into this byte array. But if, for example, we save the file with this player stats, with these 3 different fields, and we save this file somewhere on our computer, and then we deleted the game, and for example, in the future, they released an update for the game, and they added some more information into this class. So then you load this old file into your game and it can cause this file to be corrupted because your file was saved with this class, but the new version of the game has more fields or maybe the class name was changed. So the game will not know how to load, how to deserialize this file into your new classes. So that's why it's a very risky thing to do, saving using this binary. Now, a lot of games use it, but just know that it's something that a lot of Unity developers try to avoid. They try to avoid saving using this binary formatter because it can cause the players to just lose their data, okay? So if we don't want to risk it, we can use JSON, but we said that JSON is saving the information in plain English, right? So how do we fix this problem? We can fix this problem by encrypting the file after we created the JSON file. So we basically save it into a JSON file and then we encrypt it into some kind of gibberish code. And then when we load the game, it will simply take this gibberish code and it will decrypt it. And we are going to get this JSON and then we're going to load the JSON into our classes. So eventually we're going to get this file on our computer. So if a player opens the file, he will not see all of this information in plain English. He will see this gibberish. So this is a very useful way to save our game because we can also use the JSON to debug and to test our game and to see what it saved, but no one can actually modify the files because they will not understand what is going on inside the file. And the way that we're going to encrypt this is by using some kind of unique key that only we are going to have. Now, of course, if a hacker really wants to hack your game, he will go into your game files, he will find this key, and then he will encrypt the file. But all of this is relevant for single-player games, right? Because in multiplayer games, you're going to save your files online, so all of this is not relevant. All of this is only relevant for single-player games. So in single-player games, if a hacker really goes through all of this effort and hacks your game and finds the key and decrypts your JSON files, he will actually have nothing to gain but just to increase his own level or beat the game by himself, right? He is not going to ruin it for others. He is not going to cheat against other people. There will be no impact on the actual game, right? He will only ruin it for himself, for his own single player experience. So If he goes through all of this trouble, then let him hack and let him get the file, okay? But in multiplayer games, you're not going to have all of this, so it doesn't really matter. So eventually, we're going to use this JSON method to save our game, and we're going to encrypt it, of course. But I'm also going to show you how to use this binary. So if you don't like this idea of this JSON file, you're still going to learn how to create this binary file. Now, it's not going to take a lot of time to do this and this because eventually we're going to have two methods for the JSON and two methods for the binary to save and to load. And we're going to have other methods that are going to be general and they're going to be used by both of these methods, okay? So this is the roadmap for the next few episodes. We're going to start with the PlayerPref. We're going to save our options menu, our settings menu, and then we're going to create this binary saving, right? We're going to create a few methods that are going to save it into a binary file. And then after we're done with all of this, we're going to create these methods that are going to save our game into a JSON file. So you're going to have all of these ways and you can choose whatever you want. And of course, I'm also going to show you how to encrypt and decrypt your JSON file. So it's going to be interesting. We're going to deal with a lot of things that you usually don't deal with. We're going to deal with bytes. And even if you don't know about this, and even if it sounds scary, don't worry. I'm not going to go too deep into this, but you're going to learn a few cool things and it's going to increase your knowledge as a developer and it's going to help you a lot. So let's get started with the first part, which is the PlayerPref. So we start by entering into our main menu scene, the scene that we created in the previous episode, and we can see our entire menu. So the first thing we want to do is to create some kind of manager that is going to deal with all of this saving. So we're going to create a new empty object and we're going to name it main menu save manager. So it's going to deal with the saving of the main menu. Now we're going to create a new script that will be of the same name. So main menu save manager, and we're going to open the script. We're going to start by making this manager into a singleton. So we're going to delete all of this and we're going to find a singleton and just copy the code. So we need this awake as usual. And then public static main menu manager save manager instance get set. So again, that's what we usually do to create a singleton. Now we can close this. So what do we want to do? We want to use PlayerPref to save our different settings in the settings menu. Now we're going to have a different episode that is going to be focused on the settings menu, that we're going to completely create the settings menu. But in this episode, I want to create just one part of the settings menu, and it will be the volume. So we're going to save this volume, we're going to load the volume, and we're going to learn about PlayerPref using this one setting. We want to be able to save our music and to load our music. So we are going to create two different methods that are going to do it. So the first one will be public void save music volume. And we're going to receive a float. And we're simply going to save this value. So for example, our volume will be 100, right? It will be full volume. Then the value will be 100. If we decrease the volume and it will stand on 50, then the value will be 50. Of course, we're going to call these methods from a different place. So we want to save this value. In order to save into PlayerPref, all we need to do is say PlayerPref. So set float. And we want to set a float because the value is a float. So we want to set a float into PlayerPrefs. So first of all, we need to give a name to this float. So we're going to name it music volume. And then after this comma, we want to insert the value that is going to be saved. So the value will be this volume, right? So now we are saving a float named music volume with the value of the volume that we receive into PlayerPref. And in order to make it final, we need to do PlayerPrefs save. So now it will basically save the value that is going to be passed into this method. It's very simple, right? We simply save a float, we give it a name, and we give it a value. And in order to load the data, it's even easier. Let's copy all of this. Let's rename it to load music volume. And because we want to load the music volume, we're going to return a float. And we don't need to get any kind of parameter. And over here, we're simply going to return PlayerPrefs get float this time. And we simply need to provide it with the name. So this is the name of the float that we want to get. So when we call this method, we're going to get the value that we saved into PlayerPref. So it's very, very simple. Now, we're going to have more than just music volume. We're also going to have the effects volume. We're going to have the master volume, right? There are different types of volumes. So we're going to copy all of this. And we can also put some kind of comment. Effects, and we simply need to change the name. So when we call this save method, it will save the value into the effects volume float, right? And then when we load the effects volume, we simply call it by its name. So it has to be the exact name. Now this will work, but think about it. If we have different variations, we're going to have to create more and more of these save and load methods, and it can just create a very long and complicated code. So in order to fix this problem and in order to be more efficient, we can actually save entire classes into the PlayerPrefs. So instead of having a music volume, an effects volume, and then a master volume, we can simply create a class that will be the volume class, the volume settings class. And then we can just save this class and then load it once and we get all of this information. So to do that, we first want to create this class so we can do it inside the same script. We don't have to create a separate script because this class is related to the saving, so we don't have to do it in a different place. So we simply say public class saved volume settings. And inside this class, we're going to have a public float music, public float effects, and public float master. So master is like the main volume. So if you decrease this, it will decrease all the volume. And these are the separate ones for just the music or just the effects. Many games have even more volume settings, right? For maybe the chat or NPC's conversation and things like that. So some games have 10 different types of volumes. That's why you don't want to create all of these methods. So now we have this class over here and we want to save this class. Now, before we can save it, we need to tell Unity that this class will be serializable. And it means that it can actually turn into bytecode. It can turn into a byte array and be stored inside our computer. And I'm also going to show you where exactly all of this is saved and how it looks. But in order to save this class, we need to say that it's serializable. So we're going to say system serializable. And we also saw it over here. The same way we turn it into a binary file, we serialize it and then we deserialize it. So also when it's saved into this PlayerPref, it serializes the information and then it deserializes the information. So now that we have this class, we can create the save and load methods for this class. So over here, we're going to say public void save volume settings, and it's going to receive all of these three types of volumes. So it's going to have a float of music, float effects, and float master. After we receive all of these values, we simply want to create an instance of this class before we save it. So we're going to have a volume saved volume settings, and it's going to be equals to new saved volume settings. And inside, we're going to set all the data. So this class has a music field, an effects, and a master. So the music will be equals to music. The effects will be equals to effects. And the master will be equals to master. So when we call this method, we're simply going to supply all of this information, and then we're going to create an instance of this class with these values. And then when this class is populated with these values, we can save this entire class into PlayerPref. Now, I don't like that it's called saved volume settings. Let's just rename it to volume settings. Okay, I think it's better. And now we want to save this entire class. So PlayerPref set string. And the reason we're saying set string is because we're going to save this class as a JSON into PlayerPref. Now don't get confused. We're not using this method, but because we're not saving a single variable, but an entire class, we want to save it as a JSON string, and it will serialize it into bytecode. But all of this will happen over here inside the PlayerPref. So we set a string, and we're going to name it volume or volume settings. And then we need to pass in the value. Now the value is this class, right? It's this instance. This is what we want to save. But because this is a class and we can only save a string, or we can save a string, we can save a float, we can save an int, right, into the PlayerPref, but we cannot save an entire class. So we're saving it as a string. We're naming it volume, and the value will be JSON utility to JSON. And we're going to simply convert this class into a JSON. And then it's going to save this entire JSON as a string into the PlayerPref. And you're going to see how it looks. But this is just a trick to be able to save this entire class, okay? I hope you understand what is going on. And of course, we also need to do the same thing we did over here. We need to save it and finalize it. So this is the method to save this class. Of course, if you have other volume types, you can add them over here, you can add them over here, and of course you need to create them inside your class. Now, in order to load the volume settings, we're going to say public volume settings, right? Because we want to return this class. Load volume settings. We don't need to get anything as a parameter. And then we're going to have an instance of these settings that we're going to load from the PlayerPref. And we're going to return it eventually. So we need to say JSON utility from JSON. And see that over here we said to JSON, right? We saved this class into a JSON, but here we want to get this class from a JSON. So we say from JSON, Then inside these brackets, we need to tell it what kind of class we want to get from the JSON. So this is the kind of class, okay? He needs to know the structure of the class that we're trying to get from the JSON. And then we need to load this actual class into this method. So we're going to say PlayerPref get string volume, right? So when we do all of this, it will simply get the string of the JSON. It will get it as a string. But because all of this happens inside this method, then it's going to convert this string into an actual class. So it will save it as the class. We can also say something like that, okay, if it's easier for you. It's just this volume settings that we're trying to load from the JSON. And it's going to be saved over here. And then we're going to return this class settings. Of course, we can also make it better so we don't have these two lines. So we're simply returning the settings, or we're simply returning all of this, right? We don't need these settings. So this is the easier way, the shorter way. Now, on the other side, the place we're going to call this method is going to just do this, right? We're going to call this method, and then we can access the different fields from this method. So we can do music, and then we're going to get the value of the music. Or we can do master, and we can get the value of the master. Of course, all of this will happen on the other side where we called this load volume. And of course, we're going to do it together. But this is a way to save an entire class and then load the class and get the different fields. So because we did all of this, we don't need all of these methods. And the difference is that here it's going to save all of these values together. If you have some kind of situation when you want to save only one value or you want to load only one value, then you can separate it, right? Maybe you want to load the entire volume settings over here. So you're going to load this entire class, but then you also want to load a specific thing by itself. So maybe load only the music volume. Then you can do all of this, right? Return. And over here, we're going to save it like before. Volume settings, so it will be clear, right? We're loading this class over here, and then we're going to return only the music. So now it's going to return this music. So we don't need all of this, right? We don't need all of this. We're going to use the one class. So now that we have this code, we can start creating the UI for the settings menu, and then we can use both of these methods to save and load the volume. So over here, we're going to open our canvas. We are going to disable the main menu, and we're going to display the settings menu. Now inside the settings menu, we don't have much. We only have this title and this back button. So we're going to click on this title. We're going to make it a bit smaller. We're going to position it somewhere. And then we're going to create a new image. And we're going to name it volume section. And we're going to increase it a bit. And move it over here. Now we're going to change it to be black and transparent a bit, something like 130, right? 130 on the alpha, so now it's transparent. Now inside this volume section, we're going to have a UI text mesh pro, and we're going to name it master title, and we're also going to create a UI slider, okay? Because we want to have a slider to be able to change the volume. So we have this, we're going to resize the slider to about 600 on 80. That's something that fits my game. Maybe in your case, you're going to have a different value. And we're going to position this title above it. We're going to rename it to master. That we're going to make it bold and maybe increase the size to about 50 or maybe 40. We're going to place this over here. And let's just zoom a bit. So we have this slider over here. We have the title. Let's rename the slider to be master slider. Now inside this master slider, we're going to click on the background. We're going to change the background to be black and about 1/3 of the alpha. And then we click on this fill area on the fill, and we're going to change the color to something like something orange. And inside this handle, you can see the handle. We're simply going to click on the handle and we're going to disable this image because we don't want to have a handle. Maybe you want to have a handle. I don't want to have a handle. So we're going to click on this and it's going to remove the handle. Now we can see a bit of orange here, and that's just because the slider is empty. So we can go to the master slider and change the value to be 100. And we can say that the minimum value is 0, the maximum is 100, and we're going to use whole numbers. Okay, so now we can see it go up and go down. Now inside of this master slider, we're going to create a new UI Text Mesh Pro, and we're going to rename it slider value. And we're going to press over here Alt and stretch it to fit this entire slider. Then we're going to position it in the middle and we're going to make it bold and we're going to change it to 100 or maybe 0. It doesn't matter, we're going to change it programmatically. We can also change it to be 30, something like that. So now that we have the slider, we want to duplicate it and have 2 more sliders, one for the effects and one for the music. So we're going to select the title and the slider, and we're going to Control D and then once more. And now we're going to rename this to music title. And we're going to select both of these. We're going to drag them here, and we're going to select both of these, drag them here. And we're going to rename all the rest of the things, so the effects should be. The next thing we want to do is to actually be able to change the values using the code, right? We want to be able to drag this slider and then it's going to increase the value inside the script. So to do this, we're going to create another singleton, and the singleton will be the settings manager. We add a new script. Then we're going to make it into a singleton as well. So we just go over here, we copy this and that. And now we want to have a reference to the sliders and to this value text, right? We want to change this text when the value is changing. So over here, or rather, doesn't matter, public slider, and we need to use the UI slider, master slider, and public game object master value. And we're going to do the same 2 more times. And then inside the update method, we basically want to update the value according to the value of the slider. So over here, let's just collapse this. Update. So master value, get component. And because it's not a regular text, but it's a text mesh pro, we need to say text mesh pro UGUI, and we need to import the package. So we hover and using TMP Pro. And now we want to set the text. We want to set this text over here, this 0, to be the value of the slider. So equals not like that. Master slider value, right? The value of the slider. And now we're simply displaying the value of the slider inside a string that will be placed inside the master value, which is this text over here, right? If we go inside, we can see this slider value. Now we can also rename this, so we can change this to fx value. And now that we have this, we can also reference all of these things. So we click on the settings manager, and of course we need to save this first. So now we need all of these references. So we go over here and we grab the master slider over here and the master value over here. And before we run it to see how it looks, let's also collapse all of this and copy our title, duplicate it, volume title, and resize it to be about, let's say, 80. And maybe also resize this volume section. So again, I'm not a designer, but I think that this looks nice. So now we have all of this and we can run the game and see if the value actually changes when we move the slider. Of course, only this one works because we still did not create it for the rest. So let's do this. And we can see that all of them are on 58. We can now move it 100 or 0. And that's nice. But if we set them to be, let's say, 15, and then we exit the game, and then we go back into the game, nothing will be saved, and it will just reset to the value that we have over here, right? So we want to be able to save these values, and the same goes for the other settings that we're going to have in this settings menu. Let's do this, okay? Now we need to decide at what point we want to save these settings, right? Because if we're going to change this and we're going to change this, we're not going to save the values every time we move the slider. To do this, we need to save it inside the update method, and that's something we definitely don't want to do. We don't want to keep saving every frame. It will greatly hurt our performance. So we want to find a spot in time that we want to save. Now we have two options. We can save the game when the player goes back into the menu, or we can have some kind of apply button that will simply save all the changes. So if you want to have this apply button, all you need to do is create another button and just call the method when we click on this apply. So basically we just want to click on this back button and we want to call a method that will save all of this. Now the method that we want to call is this method that we created, this save volume settings. in the previous episode, we used this onClick, right? Where was it? Back button. We use this onClick to run different methods or to do different actions. The problem is that this method wants to receive several arguments, right? So we cannot do it from the inspector. We cannot do it inside this onClick. So we're going to have to do it inside the script itself. And all of this will happen inside the settings manager because the settings manager is the one that is in charge of the settings, so we can also use it to save the settings. So we go back into the settings manager and we want to have a reference to this back button. So public button, back button. And then inside the start method that we still don't have, start, we are going to create a non-click on this back button. So back button, on click, add listener, and then we're going to create this lambda. So it's very similar to what we did in the crafting system with the delegate, right? It's basically the same thing, but here we're just removing this delegate keyword. Now inside we need to put, let's see, we have this missing, right? Okay. Now, when we click on the back button, we are going to run some code. So we need to place the code inside. And the code that we want to run is this method, right? So we're going to copy this and we're going to call this method, and we can call it because it's inside the singleton. So we can call it from anywhere we want. So main menu, save manager, instance, save volume settings, and then we need to provide it with all of these values, right? With the music, with the effects, and with the master volume. And we can do it easily because we have these sliders over here. So the first one is music, so we can basically just take this music slider, dot value. The next one is effects, so effects slider, value, and the last one is master slider, value. So we're simply passing the values of these sliders into this method, and it's going to take these values and it's going to save them inside this class first, and then it's going to take this entire class and it's going to save it into the PlayerPref. And in order to see that it works, we can also add a print saved to PlayerPref. So now it should save our data. Let's save everything. Let's go back over here. So now when we change these values and we click on this back button, it should save the information. So for that, let's close the settings menu. Let's open the main menu. And of course, we have a null reference exception, and that's because we did not reference the button. So over here, we still need this button. So we take this, where was it? Back button, and we drag it over here. Okay, so let's run the game. So now when we go into the settings, we can see that everything is 100. So let's change it to be master should, let's say 50. The music will be 30 and the effects will be 10. Okay, so remember 50, 30, and 10. And now when we click on this back button, it says saved to PlayerPref. Now if we go back again, then it is still going to show us this because we're still inside the game. We did not exit. But if we're going to exit the game and come back, it's not going to show over here because we're not actually loading this data, okay? We did save the data into the PlayerPref, but we're still not loading the data. Now, before we deal with the loading of the data, I want to show you where exactly this data is saved on our computer. So in Windows, you can simply go over here and type regedit, and then you're going to see this registry editor. And then it's going to open something like that, and you need to go to HKey current user, software, okay? And then inside software, you need to find Unity. And inside Unity, you need to find Unity Editor. And inside Unity Editor, default company. You can actually change the default company to be the name you want it to be if you have a company, but if you're not changing it, it's going to be default company. So inside you have all of your projects. So then select the project that you're working inside. So ours is this 3D survival game, and you're going to see all kinds of pieces of data that are saved. So one of them is the actual PlayerPref that we saved. And it's this last one. We can also see this name, volume. Okay, now you don't need to really know all of this, but it's just nice to know where this data is saved. It can also be useful if you have some kind of bug and you want to debug it, you want to find the problem. So it's also useful to know where all of this is stored. Okay, so you can just copy this path and then go over here and into the PlayerPref. Now, if we click on this PlayerPref, we can see some strange things, and these are just hexadecimal values for our byte array. Now, if you don't know all of these words and you don't know what they mean, it doesn't really matter, okay? And you can just research this and Google this and learn about this. But we can see over here that we have this music 30, effects 10, and master 50. And these are the exact values that we saved. So it saved the class as a JSON, and we can see that we have this JSON format over here, right? It's a bit stuck together, but it is a JSON format. Okay, and over here we simply see the hexadecimal values of these strings. So this one, 7b, is this bracket. This 22 is this quotation mark. This 6D is this M. Okay, so all of these letters, all of these characters are saved into this byte array that is represented with these hexadecimal values. Now, again, you don't need to know all of this, but it's just nice to know that everything is saved because we said that it's going to serialize our JSON, our string, into a byte array. Now, if you want to play around with it, you can also go into this website that I'm going to leave you a link in the description. And it just explains some of these things. And if we go to the bottom, we can also see this chart over here. And we can see that every hexadecimal value has some kind of symbol. And we also have the binary code for this hexadecimal. So it's actually saved as a binary code, but then it's converted into a hexadecimal, and we can also see it as these symbols. So let's say we go over here and we see this bracket, right? And we can see 7b. So if we go over here and we look for 7b, then we can see that 7b is this opening bracket. Okay, so each one of these symbols, each one of these bytes, because each one over here is a byte, represents one of these strings. Now, this is not a computer science class, and I don't want to waste your time on things that you may not want to learn, but if you want to learn these things, it's just going to make you a better developer. The point is that we did save this class into the PlayerPref, even though we cannot load it, right? So now let's take care of the loading. So let's close this. And if I delete this file, then it's going to delete all of this information that is saved, right? So maybe sometime you do want to delete it. So now let's close the registry. Let's close this. So now we need to decide at what point we want to load this data, right? When we first start the game, we want this data to be loaded, so when we go into the settings, we can see these values, but we also want to hear the volume even when we just start the game. So this data should be loaded at the beginning of the entire application, before we even start a new game, over here. So the first thing that will be loaded are all of these different singletons, and we have this settings manager, so we can do this over here inside the settings manager. So inside the settings manager, inside the start method, we are going to load the game. Now, you don't have to do it inside the coroutine, but I think it's better. So start coroutine, and we're going to load and apply settings. Now we still did not create this method, so we're going to generate this method, and this will be an I enumerator because it's going to be inside this coroutine. And what we want to do is just call this load and set volume. And then we want to create some kind of delay, yield, return, new wait 4 seconds, and we're going to put in some kind of very low value. And we also want to create this method. Right now we only have volume settings, but in the future we're going to have other settings as well. So all of these settings will happen inside this method. So we're not saying load volume settings, we're saying something generic, load and apply settings. And then we have this method for the volume. Then we're going to have a method for load graphic settings, maybe load key bindings, things like that, right? So right now we only have these volumes, but all of these will go over here. And when we load the volume, we want to load the data, but we also want to set it. We want to actually set it into the sliders, into the game. So inside this load and set volume, we're going to load the data from the JSON, and we're going to store it inside some kind of temporary instance. So volume settings, volume settings. Now you're not going to see it because it's inside the other class, so we need to say using static main menu save manager, and we're going to name it volume settings, and we're going to extract it. We're going to load it from the JSON, so we can just use this main menu save manager instance load volume settings. So this load volume settings will simply return this class that is stored inside the PlayerPref. It's going to return it, and then we're going to get it over here and save it inside this volume settings. And then we can use it to set the different values. And because all of this happens inside the settings manager, we have access to these sliders. So it's very simple. Master slider value equals volume settings master. Music slider value volume settings music, and effect slider value volume settings effects. And we can say print volume settings are loaded. So that's the way we load the settings and we get them, and then we apply them, right? We set them into the actual sliders. So let's save this. And now everything should work. So we go back over here. And we run the game, and we can see that the settings are loaded, right? Because it's going to load them at the beginning of the game. And now when we go to the settings, we can see that they're actually saved the way we saved them. And if we're going to change it to be 1, 2, 3, and then go back, it's going to save them again. If we go to the registry, we're going to see the different values. And then if we go back, it's not going to change because we're still inside the game. But if we close the game and then we start the game and we go into the settings, we can see that it was saved. So this is the way we use PlayerPref, which are very simple to use. But we can now save the different settings. And in the future, I'm going to have a separate episode for the different settings. Maybe we're going to make it a bit bigger and we're going to add more things to the settings menu. For now, we only have this volume, and that's just because I wanted to show you how to save using PlayerPref. Of course, we still did not connect the actual sliders to the volume of the game. So all of this will happen in that episode that will be dedicated for the settings. But it will basically just be a matter of connecting this to the music manager, to the sound manager, right? And then we're going to manipulate the sound manager using these sliders. So it's pretty simple, but I'm going to show you this in a different episode. For now, we are done with this PlayerPref. We can save our settings, and you can also use this for other games to save simple data. Now we want to be able to save big chunks of code. We don't want to save a small class with 3 different fields, right? Master, music, and effect. We want to be able to save big amounts of data. So in order to save big amounts of data, we have to use this binary or this JSON options. And we want to save them into a file, so then we can back up the file, we can use the file for debugging, we can share the file with friends, and basically this is the way we save the actual data of the game and not just some settings. So we're going to continue in the next episode, and thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you're still not subscribed. Please leave a like if you learned something new, and I'll see you next time.